Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us on Sanity with Allison Camerata and Dave Briggs. We are so excited to be launching this program because we feel the time is ripe for this. There's so much insanity and madness in the world that we're just going to try to give you a little bit of sanity, be it politics, be it culture, be it whatever is going on in your world, because we know how many people have tuned out because it's not good for their mental health and central nervous system to stay engaged with the news right now.
Indeed. And of course, most of my career has been in and out of sports. I am a consummate sports fan, so we will certainly talk about sports, but not from a highlight perspective. We'll talk about the big cultural issues like gambling. And gambling is honestly headed towards an epidemic. And we are in the midst of March Madness. $3 billion will be gambled on March Madness. Games all day long, Allison. Kids are betting, adults are betting, men and women are betting. And the companies involved have spent $430 million last year alone marketing this thing. But FanDuel putting their money where their mouth is and saying we're going to amplify the message of problem gambling. They want people to be aware of that. And their messenger is Craig Carton, who is a sports radio legend in the New York City area. He is also the host of FS1's Breakfast Ball. And he spent time in jail and is now launching a show on FanDuel, on their Fast channel, on their YouTube page, talking about gambling issues. We are thrilled to welcome in Craig Carton. Craig, I'm curious your thoughts on March Madness. 4 conferences in the Sweet 16, 7 from the SEC. It's basically mega conferences, mega money, no Cinderella.
Look, tournament-wise, one of the things that has captured all of our attention emotionally and beyond are the Cinderellas. It's when the little guy beats the big guy. And we kind of, we embrace those teams and we kind of call them our own and we root for them. And what you said is accurate. We don't have that. There are no Cinderellas left in this tournament after Colorado State lost at the buzzer to Maryland yesterday. And the reason for that is because, well, it's twofold. One, NIL money. We're now paying kids millions of dollars to play sports at the collegiate level. So the smaller schools with less of a budget for athletics simply can't compete unless they have that one big, billionaire, graduate who cares about the program and will invest personal money into them going out and getting the best players. And then number 2 is something that they call the portal. And the portal's basically, for those of you that don't follow sports that close, is like free agency for every college athlete. So sure, you may have signed a 4-year, guaranteed scholarship offer from one school, but every single year, if another school comes along and says, hey, come play for us, you'll be on TV more, we can give you some money, you have a chance to be in the tournament, you can leave the first school and go play for the next school, and you can not only do it every year, consider this, there are 16 teams left vying for the national championship for this year. Today, while the tournament is still going on, every one of those kids can announce that they're leaving the school they're currently playing for to play for somebody else next year because the portal opened up today. That makes no sense, and that's why you're going to see fewer and fewer Cinderella stories making runs deep into the tournament. It's almost like a dinosaur.
As a clueless sports consumer, understood exactly what he just said and how crazy that is.
Well, and that matters because people like you got gripped to the NCAA tournament because of these Cinderella stories. Does it suck, Craig? Will we ever have them again? I mean, FAU was kind of 1 in 23, but what happened? Dusty May went to Michigan. He's in the Sweet 16. His players all disappeared to high-ranking NIL schools. Has it broken what we all loved about college sports?
It's certainly in danger of it, and FAU is the best example. 2 years ago, they're in the Final Four. We all love that story. We all kind of adopted them as our team, and now you've got the 3 highest scorers and the coach who are still playing for different teams in this year's tournament, just 2 years later. Look, it's a broken system. It's got to be fixed. I'm all for the players getting paid because they do earn millions of dollars for their respective universities. But the fact that a kid can transfer schools during the tournament, albeit for next year, it just doesn't taste right in my mouth. and it's got to be fixed.
I just talked to Charlie Baker about this a couple of weeks ago. He
Name
hates the
drop.
portal. Well, yes, he hates the portal every bit as much as you and
Yeah,
me and all the sports fans out there. He feels helpless. What
yeah.
should they do?
Well, look, I think, look, not every player gets paid, right? I do think there should be a contract signed when a school signs a player to play, and I think it should be a 2-year contract. I think if we're going to commit resources to a kid, and I'm all for the kids getting paid, I think there's got to be a commitment that goes both ways. I don't think kids should be able to jump when there's money involved from school to school to school. And you'll see when you watch the tournament later this week for the Sweet 16, there are kids that are now literally on their 4th school in 5 years. And, there's no loyalty at all. And I don't blame the kid for doing it. If there's money on the table, the kids should be able to go get that money because they're earning a lot of money for their schools. But the portal needs to be changed. The way we do NILs needs to be changed. There needs to be a governing body to not just protect the schools and their investment in the kid, but also to protect these kids, because there's a lot of stories that you're going to start reading about more and more now where a kid commits to a school because he was promised A, B, and C financially, and the promise never gets met. And then what's the kid to do? Can't fight them in courts. You don't have money to fight these cases legally. And there's a whole boatload of kids that we don't talk about that only go from school A to school B because of whatever promises were made. And then the dirty middleman who's making the promise never fulfills the obligation. So the kid's now transferred from schools, doesn't have the nice new car or the NIL money in his bank account. And now what's that kid supposed to do? Hope he gets another offer to go somewhere else. So, look, the NCAA has always been dirty, top to bottom dirty. There's always been ways to cheat, to try to acquire the commodity, which is the kid who can dunk a basketball and make a 25-foot shot, or in football, throw a ball, catch a ball, etc. But the system's still broken.
I'm with Greg. I mean, I don't know anything about this, but I'm with him.
One more question, and I'm eager to talk about the comeback with Craig Carton. We're here with Craig, the host of Breakfast Ball on FS1. Who wins it all? Is this a Duke's tournament to lose?
I hate Duke. I hate Duke with a passion. Every time they're good, we grease the skids for them to go right to the Final Four. Yesterday against Baylor, they had 19 free throws attempts in the first half. Baylor had 2. Allison sees that difference. That's not fair. That's not an even playing field. Yeah, Duke stinks. They're also the best team. I think Duke is obviously the favorite to win it. I don't like going with favorites to win things. I like seeing the underdog, if possible, win. Look, Florida, blue blood. Houston, blue blood. Duke, blue blood. There's one school out there that is not a blue blood, that's got a very good coach who does have personal baggage that is associated with him, and it's serious, ugly stuff in his past. But Chris Beard, the head coach at Ole Miss, is a phenomenal head coach, and Ole Miss is the type of team, outside of what the coach was accused of, and there's some he said, she said, I don't know what's true. If the accusations were true from a couple years ago, then I root against them. He was never brought to court and found guilty of what he was accused of, and he's a damn good coach, and that's a program you can root for.
The head coach of Florida has been accused of some pretty ugly shit as well. Look into that, and no one's talking about it. This guy seemed to have stalked college students, which no one seems to care about. I lied. There is one last question about the tournament. Danny Hurley, who I believe is the greatest coach in the sport, he does too. His antics to some have gotten old. How about you? What do you think of the constant berating of the refs?
I love it. I love it. And I'm a big Danny Hurley guy. Listen, college basketball is as much about the premier coaches as it is about the premier talent. We just had a matchup. All we talked about leading up to Saturday was Rick Pitino against John Calipari, 2 of the great coaches, Hall of Fame coaches of all time. We weren't talking about the kids. We were talking about the matchup of those 2 titans in the industry. Danny Hurley is good for basketball. And yes, the antics rub some people the wrong way, and constantly yelling and screaming and blaming the refs. But man, the guy won back-to-back national titles. He's a damn good coach and a good dude. I love him, and I think he's great for the sport.
I love him too. I can't get enough of it, man.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that you like the yelling at the refs.
I'm a ref yeller.
I know you are.
You're right.
Okay, we're talking locally. All right, so can we move on?
Yeah. We do want to talk about the dangers of gambling addiction in the show that will be streaming 10 a.m. on FanDuel's Fast channel as well as FanDuel's YouTube channel, The Comeback with Craig Carton.
So, Craig, I'm really interested in this because, as we all know, addiction is real, and we certainly have gotten a lot more sophisticated about drug and alcohol addiction. And you'd be hard pressed to find a family that hasn't had some of that struggle in their life. But gambling addiction, I think we used to put into a different bucket, as though it's not physical somehow. It's not physiological. You can make that decision. But I'm starting to see it differently. And so will you just tell us a little bit about your personal story before we
Yeah.
get
Well,
into
look, I'm a compulsive gambler. My story played out quite publicly based on my, for lack of a better term, popularity as the most listened to morning sports talk guy in the country in New York City on WFAN, the station that started sports talk radio in this country. And I went from being on the top of the mountain, having everything you could ever ask for. Started off in Buffalo, New York, making $12,000 a year. And 30 years later, there I am at the pinnacle of my chosen profession. And I threw it all of it away because I wanted to gamble, needed to gamble more and more and more, and fell prey to this addiction and disease. And I know people don't want to talk about gambling still as an addiction, but it is. It's been verified by every medical textbook now as no different, no better or worse than being an alcoholic or a drug addict. And yet, it's the only addiction of the big three that carries with it the moniker degenerate. An alcoholic's just an alcoholic. A drug addict is someone who has a problem with drugs, but for some reason, people of my ilk, addicts, gambling addicts, compulsive gamblers, we have to be referred to as degenerates. And some of us call it ourselves that, which is part of the problem as well. So there's a stigma now associated with a gambling addict that is not associated with an alcoholic or a drug addict. Number two, gambling addicts are invisible to the world from the standpoint that if I line 10 addicts up from left to right, we could probably collectively figure out which guy or gal is drunk based on their physical appearance, how they sound, how they behave. We could probably figure out who's stoned or doing some type of illicit narcotic. But the gambling addict stands there perfectly. And there's no blood test and no urine test for you to know that behind your back, behind everyone's back, late at night when no one's watching, I'm committed to gambling as much as possible. And I risk my family's welfare to gamble. And I risk my income to gamble. I risk my job to gamble. And I did all of that. And I wound up paying the price of losing my freedom, not because I gambled, but because I became a compulsive gambler and started making really bad decisions around my gambling. Those bad decisions then invaded my professional life, my personal life, the people I associated with, and I didn't care. And I did nothing to stop it until I got to a point where the bad decisions I was making were, frankly, breaking the law. Now, I didn't know I was breaking the law, and we could debate that another day, but I was making really bad decisions, and it cost me my freedom, not to mention my professional reputation, my reputation as a father, as a husband, and all the things that mattered to me. And now here I am, 8 years almost after being arrested for fraud, now being in a position where I can gladly use my personal experience and the very worst day and days and months and years of my life to help other people and pay it forward and just make other people aware that with the quite recent proliferation and legalization of online gambling and gambling on your cell phone if you want to, that we're going to have thousands of more people gambling for the first time, and by proxy a lot of people now representing the compulsive gambling world, and it's going to become, epidemic might be too strong,
No.
but it's becoming an epidemic because the fastest growing segment of the population that's gambling are young adults, boys and girls in high school, freshmen in college who have never earned a penny in their lives and are now risking money they don't have to pay back. And they're going down this bad rabbit hole. And it's concerning to me as a dad of four. My kids range in age from 14 to 22. They're exposed to it like every American kid is. And I think it's important for me to tell my story and then bring other people in so they can share their lived experience so that we stop looking at gambling addicts as the scourge of society. And we recognize that the next person to present with a problem is your mailman, your fireman, your cop, your postman, your school teacher, your guidance counselor. It's pervasive in every walk of life.
Or my son. And part of the reason I wanted to have you on is, and he's going to kill me for this, my son is 17, and I hear him screaming at all odd hours about games he doesn't care about. I know he gambles way too much, as do Craig, every single one of his friends on FanDuel, on DraftKings, on the app.
Talk to him about it?
And the problem is us, Craig. We allow it. He has to go through us. You cannot gamble unless your parents are allowing you to do so.
But I mean, have you put in any guardrails, or have you tried?
None. And I feel powerless, Craig. What do you advise parents to do?
Well, look, it's a great question. And the reality is that there are more high school kids gambling now than ever before because the access is there. And people like you who are parents who want to have that great bond with their kid and think it's harmless, I'll set up my kid with an account, he'll make the picks, no one's going to be the wiser. That becomes the problem for a few reasons. Number one, as soon as you do that, you've lost total control of the situation because your son has a phone, he has access to his accounts, and he's going to do what he wants to do, and you're going to pay. And that's the second biggest problem, not just the access. Your son, when he loses, you're paying the debt. So he has no comprehension of what it's like to make a wager, lose the wager, and that loss costs him money that he worked hard for. Number three, you'd be surprised, even though you have a 17-year-old at home, how many of these kids strike deals with fellow kids in high school to loan shark for them to loan them money, to help them set up accounts on black market websites, which exist all day, every day. And that's what's happening. As much as kids are using their mom and dad to open up accounts, which they cannot do, but they're doing. We're not silly. We know they're doing it. You just said your own son does it. And I have family friends who are doing it. And I tell every one of them it's a bad idea. You're going to call me 6 months from now and tell me your kid's got a problem. What do I do? And outside of me telling I told you so, I'm now going to try to help and counsel your son or daughter to get them through this tough part of their lives and help them stop gambling, which I do all day, every day. But it's a real problem because imagine when your son comes to you and says, Dad, I've got a problem. I owe someone $10,000. And you're like, whoa, time out. I didn't see you bet 10 grand on the account we opened together. And he's going to say, yeah, I didn't gamble it there. I gambled it with Billy. And I borrowed money from Stevie. And I owe him money with interest. I owe this guy who sent me to the website that doesn't legally exist. And I lost all the money there. And then I'll give you a real life example. A very good friend of mine has a son who's a junior in high school. Likes to gamble with his son. Told him it's a problem. Don't do it. They didn't listen. They started doing it. The kid loses. The kid loses. He's not very good at it. Dad pays the bill. Dad pays the bill. Kid finds a guy on Twitter claiming to be a bookmaker who's going to guarantee him house credit if he gambles on a black market website. The kid does. They gave him $7,500 in house credit. Junior in high school, loses every penny of it. Parents have no idea. Until the kid decided to use his Venmo account to try to pay the debt off as little bit as he could. Well, on the Venmo account, the bad guys in this story find out the kid's mom and dad's full name, their house address, where the dad works, what his partner's name is, and they call. So-and-so, I know your first and last name. I know where you live. They reach out to the gentleman's business partner. They tell the business partner, we know who you are. We know where you live. We know where you work. And if we don't get our $7,500 back by next Friday, we'll be waiting at your front door. That's a threat.
This way,
and that's real life. And that's what's happening right now.
And in that way, I totally relate to the drug the drug addiction element of it, because those are the exact same tactics, obviously, that drug addicts and their suppliers use. And it basically, just so that I understand, it lights up the same pleasure center of the
Yes.
brain, right? I mean,
Yep.
so of course, right. So it is a physical addiction because it's the same,
Yeah, it becomes one,
dopamine.
sure. Look, we're
Yeah.
chasing, I'll use my story. And I don't like to talk about the money too much because I don't want to glorify what I did. So I'm on the radio, New York City, on TV, 6 in the morning to 10 in the morning every day. Biggest audience that exists on the planet, right? And at midnight, I get in a Sprinter and I drive up to the Poconos. All right. I get there, let's just say 2 o'clock in the morning. All right. I played blackjack for 7 minutes, $30,000 a hand, every hand. I won a bunch of money that one particular day, 7 minutes, well documented. Got back in the Sprinter, drove back to New York City, a 90-minute drive, went on the radio. No one knew the difference. No one knew the better. And I was doing that as often as possible. Helicopter rides at midnight over 100 feet over the Atlantic Ocean in pitch blackness because I had to gamble and bullied the helicopter pilot to fly me to Connecticut or fly me down to New Jersey at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, with the promise of cash if you were willing to fly me in a situation you never should have flown me. So I did it at a level that's, embarrassingly bad. So when I talk to young people or parents of kids who are gambling now, I have a story that played out on HBO in a documentary, played out in the front and back pages of all the newspapers, and they respect the fact that I'm not full of crap. So anything that these kids have done, I've done times a million. And that story resonates. And unfortunately, there's no shortage of kids and families that need help. So, for example, tomorrow, I'm speaking at a private school in Connecticut. Wednesday, I'm speaking at a different school. We've done about a dozen college campuses already. And the story on the other side is always the same. I never thought I'd have a problem. Or you get people in denial. I can get out of it. Well, how are you going to get out of it? I'm going to bet my way out of it. The reality is that there might be tops 20 people in the country that are actually professional gamblers that make their living solely from gambling, maybe 20.
But part of the problem, of course, and I applaud FanDuel for airing your show, The Comeback with Greg Carton, but these companies spent $430 million last year in advertising alone. It's now legal in 38 states and DC, and the problem is it's on the most addictive device on the planet.
Right.
Do the companies, FanDuel included, share some responsibility? If you watched this segment last week with John Oliver, just did a 30-minute story on sports gambling where problem gamblers, they were probably aware some of their customers were problem gamblers and shouldn't be making the bets that they did. Do the companies bear some responsibility?
Look, I can only speak for my relationship with FanDuel because I don't know the inner workings of, DraftKings and Fanatics and BetMGM and all the other legitimate above board, Penn Gaming, all those companies. I know what FanDuel does. I know if you're an employee of FanDuel, you're ineligible for a bonus if you don't take their responsible gambling courses. I know that they dedicate millions of dollars a year to responsible gaming messaging, not just having me as an ambassador for it, but they have a team of about 20 professionals who spend all day, every day, making sure that their customers, if they do sound off an alarm because of the style of betting, which makes them potential targets as compulsive gamblers, they act on that. And while it's counterintuitive to the business, because you think, well, we just want more people to gamble and gamble as much as possible, a bad customer is bad for business. FanDuel, and again, I can only speak for them, and I've met their entire board, in Europe from their parent company, Flutter. Responsible gaming is an issue for them and one that they are very sensitive to. A customer of theirs that has a problem that loses their life savings ultimately is not good for them. It's not good for the industry. It's not good for business. And to their credit, they've dedicated tons of manpower, tons of hard, cold cash towards making people aware of the tools that exist where you can protect yourself from you becoming a compulsive gambler. And I'm proud to work with them because they put their money where their mouth is every day, all day.
So, Craig, just in terms of your personal story, did your family do an intervention? Was it just the intervention of the penal system that
Yeah.
stopped you? Like, how did you come
That's a
out of
good
it?
question. So my family knew I liked to gamble, but one of the things that I think is quite common amongst all gamblers, while recovery is individual, addiction is not, right? And there's a great commonality in me as an addict with every other addict that I've ever met, and that is I became a world-class liar. And I do have shame in that because I'm not a liar. I've lived my life pretty openly and honestly, but when it came to my gambling, nobody knew how much I wagered, nobody knew how much I won, how much I lost. I didn't share with people the amounts of hours I spent doing it was very secretive, and you wind up living the life of a loner. So for me personally, I had gotten arrested and the poop hit the fan. I'm now unemployed. I'm staring down a criminal court case, and I went to rehab. And I went to rehab for all the wrong reasons because I was still in denial that I had a problem. I went because I wanted to kind of keep my family off my back and show them, all right, fine, you think I've got a problem? Look at me, I'm going to rehab. And I thought ultimately, if I needed it, the judge would appreciate the fact that I went to rehab because gambling was at the core of my craziness when it came to what I was doing on air and off air. And I went to rehab and I sat in a room with about 12 other people, men and women from all across the country. And to be quite honest with you, the notion that women had gambling problems was foreign to me. As sexist as that sounds, it never dawned on me that I'd be in a room with men and women.
I totally
And
agree
I
with you.
was.
That's not what I was visualizing.
Me too.
Yeah. So here I am, big tough guy, wagering $30,000. I hand a blackjack and over $1 billion over 18 months on blackjack. And because I was the new guy, I went last. And the first person I'll never forget was from Oklahoma and had an addiction to dollar scratch offs, and lost his entire life savings $1 at a time. And described once looking down in his pickup truck, and those like little metallic shavings when you do the scratch offs? We've all done them, right? A pile of shavings up to his ankles and shins, scratching off, scratching off, scratching off. And I'm like, that guy's got no idea. I'm betting 30 G's a hand, dollar scratch off. Come on. And then what happened was fascinating between him and a person with a $5 Keno problem and a person, well beneath what I was doing. They described their addiction as if I had written a script and they stole my script word for word, both emotionally and mentally, how I processed my desire and need to gamble. And it was only at that moment where a light bulb went off and I go, man, it can't be that I'm that unique because they all described it the way I wrote it. So that was the first time I realized I probably have a problem. But what I did, and a lot of gamblers do, because very few compulsive gamblers quit cold turkey and never gamble again. So when I came home from rehab, I had $60,000 cash to my name. I went to a casino. This is total ego. I left 30 grand in the car. I went into the casino with 30 grand because egotistically, I had to prove to myself that I could stop whenever I wanted to stop. So the test was, if I lose the 30 grand I bring inside with me, I'm not going to my car where I know there's another $30,000. Self-test, right? Makes sense because we rationalize the irrational as addicts. And long story short, I go in. Now I need the money to split cards and double down. And I convinced myself it's a mathematical game. You have to play the game right. I know I've got the money to do it. I'll just double down and split this hand, and I won't use the rest of the money. And you know how the story ends. Mm-hmm. I lose all 60 grand. And that was 7 years ago, June 30th. And that's the last wager I've ever made of any kind. And I say that not to glorify the amounts of money, but for me, and I think a lot of addicts, and maybe you guys have an answer, I don't. So my wife and my kids and my career were always the most important things in my life. And I worked very hard to achieve the things I was able to achieve and accomplish. Like I said, my first job, I lived in a retirement home in Buffalo, New York, making $250 a week before taxes. True story. All right. and now I'm making millions of dollars doing the same damn thing I was doing for 12 grand. Okay. All of a sudden, when I did that test in the casino and failed my own test, that is, hand to God, the last wager I have ever made, almost 7 years ago now. And I don't know why I stopped. And that's the struggle for me, because I'm good now with gambling. I'm not going to gamble. I know I'm not going to gamble. I don't have the desire to gamble, but I risked everything. I threw everything in the toilet. I lost everything. I literally went from making several $1,000,000 a year to stereotypically looking under my couch cushions for change so that I could buy a bagel for breakfast. And that's not, me being hyperbolic. That's how I lived my life. And I
Wow.
couldn't tell you today why I stopped. I don't know why.
Yeah.
That is interesting to hear you say that. And by the way, 15 grand in Rapid City, South Dakota. We get those stories for sure. Was my first job. How hard is it to stay off? Because it is everywhere around you. They are throwing
Yeah.
enticing bonuses at you every weekend. The sports system now is now built around gaming. The pro sports that you cover every day
Yeah.
that used to shun gambling has now fully embraced gambling. So how hard is it for anyone to stay away?
Yeah. Look, I've gotten to a point where I'm fine with it and I can do it, but I'd be silly to tell you that that's the norm. It's not, because you're inundated with the marketing, the promotions, the ads. The NFL used to go to Congress and lobby against gambling because it ruined the integrity of the sport. But all of a sudden, when they're writing checks, the size checks, they're writing integrity be damned. We're in bed with everybody. Look, it's concerning because, like I said earlier, when the fastest growing segment of the population are younger people, boys and girls, not men and women, boys and girls that are doing it, it's a problem, right? And there is an integrity problem. We've had a handful of pro athletes get suspended for gambling, both on their sport and on other sports, from team facilities and things like that. There's a huge scandal brewing, and it's going to be on the front page of the papers sometime soon. Because if we think that players are not gambling on their own sport, they are. And the way the rules are set up for players are legally allowed to gamble on every other sport. They're not allowed to gamble on their own sport. And let that sink in for a minute. If you're down X amount of dollars, what's the first thing you're going to bet on to get out of the hole? You're going to bet on something you know best, right? So the notion that we don't have active players gambling on their own sport is ridiculous. We do. Just a matter of time until you catch them.
And so I have two questions, Greg. So did your marriage stay intact? Did you keep throughout all of this? Did you stay married?
That's a great question. My wife and I sadly were separated for 2 years, lived in different, apartments or homes, and grace of God and the fact that she's the most patient, caring, loyal human being on the planet. She set up a bunch of rules when I got out of prison that if I was going to be allowed back in the quote unquote marital home and be a hands-on father to our 4 children, there was a set of rules, almost like Moses' 10 Commandments. And if at any point from that day, from my release to the day I die, if I break any of the rules, I'm out. I'm no longer in control of the family's finances, something I did 24/7, 365. I don't pay bills. I don't have money in my bank account. And I love her to death. And she kept, to her credit, she's the warrior in all this. And I'm glad you brought that up, because we sometimes focus too much and solely on the addict. And in the reality, and I'm sure this is for all addictions, not just gambling, the people that get hurt the most are the people closest to the addict, the people that love them unconditionally, family members, best friends. You lose some of those people when you put them through what I've put my family through, and there are some relationships, sadly, I know I'll never get back. You also learn that there's some relationships you didn't realize how strong they were and how much those people are in your corner. But I'm blessed that I have a wife of now 25 years who didn't give up on me. And she had every reason to give up on me. And I'm not quite sure why she didn't, other than true love means something. And here we are, 25 years after we got married. And I would dare say, I'm not sure if she would agree with this or not, our relationship's probably, I don't want to say better, because I put her through the ringer, but we're closer because I'm more honest with her and honest with myself about who I am and what I've done.
Good for her. She sounds like an incredible woman. I mean, it sounds
Yeah.
like you have an incredible wife, and she handled it, I think, the best anybody could. My next question is for people. I mean, I don't want to use Dave's son as our one object
Right.
lesson here.
Look,
But-
I gamble all the time. I'm not gonna. It obviously came from me, Craig. I take full
But you
accountability.
feel like you
On
have-
the Super Bowl Sunday, I doubled down 6 times on the Chiefs because I kept digging a hole deeper, and that's when I knew, Craig, Jesus, somebody take that phone away, because I just kept doubling down and going all in. So sorry to interrupt, but
So
yeah.
what intervention should parents do right now so that they don't get into the scenario that you were talking?
And if I can add to that question, you started this conversation about saying we can identify certain types of addicts. How do we know when someone's an addict, when they
Yeah.
have a problem?
So 2 different questions. I'll try to answer the first one first. Look, your son shouldn't gamble, right? I'm not silly. I have teenage kids. It'd be like telling your son, hey, don't drink a beer at a house party. You know they're going to. So we also can't parent with our heads in the sand. If you have that kind of open relationship with your son, I would suggest you talk to him every day about it, because you need to find out, is he gambling behind your back? Is he gambling with kids at school? Does he have a bookie? Has he borrowed money from anybody? Number two, again, I would advise against what you're doing. He should not gamble through your account, because when he loses, you're the one paying the debt. So if your son has ever had a summer job or earned any kind of money or gets an allowance, he should have to give it to you if he loses. He needs to experience loss. He needs to go through the emotions of, I could have sworn that was a lock and the team I bet on lost and it cost me money. Because once he figures out the value of money, watch how quickly he doesn't want to gamble. Because if he's busting his ass mowing lawns and shoveling snow during the winter, and that's his money because he earned it, and now he's got to give it to you and gets nothing in return for it, he might be a little less likely to want to wager more money because it cost him his money. Like if his buddies are going out to Dave and Buster's, or he's got a girlfriend, and now he can't buy her, a movie ticket, right, and popcorn because he lost his money gambling, he may not want to gamble anymore. But I would say if he's actively gambling, you should talk to him. And if I were you, I would stop actively gambling in front of him. Learn behavior, father to son. What kid doesn't want to emulate his dad?
Fair enough. And your question,
Well, it was just that how do you recognize it? What would you say? It's
Yeah.
invisible. As you say, gambling is invisible in a way other addictions are not.
Yeah, so one of the first things is compulsive gamblers are loners. Compulsive gamblers are not looking for a good time at a party and hanging out with their buddies while they're gambling. So you'll find that your kid, any kid or any person, adult or otherwise, that becomes a compulsive gambler, one of the first things we notice is how they socialize differently. And all of a sudden they're alone a lot and they're not interested in going to play ball with their buddies or, the house party or whatever kids are doing socially. They're alone more and more and more and more. Also, taking your phone into the bathroom. We all do it. But if you're concerned that your kid's gambling, he doesn't need his phone in the bathroom. How much time is he in the bathroom? Right? How much time is he staring at his phone? Does he all of a sudden have an emotional reaction to a West Coast game in which you're well aware he could name a single player on either team, but now he's upset that, Portland State lost the basketball game, right? So it's like anything else. If you're a dutiful parent, if you love your kids and you give a shit, pardon my French there, you talk to them and you ask them what's going on in their lives and you don't accept the one-word answer. How is school? Good. And we do a thing at our table every night, every dinner. And not all my kids are home anymore. My daughter's living in New York City. I got a kid who's a sophomore in college, and I have two at home, a 14-year-old and my 22-year-old still lives with us and works in New York City. And we play a game called high-low every night without fail. What was your best part of the day? What was your worst part of the day? Nothing sacrosanct. Say whatever's real. Be open and real. And you'd be surprised how much kids are willing to share when you show them that you care.
High-low sounds like a game you could bet on. Because it sounds like a bit of a page from a gambler, but I like it, and
Yeah.
I'm going
Well,
to do
whatever you
it. Yeah, once a gambler at my dinner table.
Yeah,
that's-
you may have just answered this question, but we like to close every interview. And by the way, the show is called Sanity, with just asking our guests what they do to find sanity, given all the craziness
What's
around
your
us.
dose of sanity for us?
Well, I mean, I've been through it pretty good.
Yeah. So how do you
Um,
find it every day? It could be meditation. It could be working out. It could be something
You know what?
we haven't even talked about.
It's one of the things I also tell younger compulsive gamblers is they need a hobby. You need something to fill the time. When I went from gambling at the levels I was gambling to not gambling at all, one of the hardest parts for me was all this free mental space that I suddenly had, an emotional space, because 24/7, you're just concerned with where's the money coming from? Who do I owe? Who owes me? How am I going to gamble? Where am I going to gamble? It's overwhelming. So all of a sudden your brain is like, wow, I got all this free time on my hands. What am I going to do with it? So I go for long walks with my dog every single day, try to work out. I used to read a lot when I was, in prison, try to pick up a book every now and then. But the sanity for me, believe it or not, is actually counseling active compulsive gamblers and trying to help them. It's therapeutic for me because it reminds me of who I was and all the bad choices in life I made. And there's great satisfaction I get when you have a kid who gets it and gets through it, and you get that call from his mom or dad, like, thank you so much. He's gone 6 months without gambling. I got my son back. And you talk to the kid who now recognizes that life can be pretty damn good when you're not gambling. And not every story is a success story, unfortunately. But when you have the kids that do get it and your story resonates and you've helped them get through it, it's one of the most rewarding things I've ever experienced in my life.
Craig, you're the best. This has been so
Unbelievable.
educational.
I mean,
think
seriously.
you've just changed Dave's life. And
Without a doubt.
it's really interesting to talk to you. And this is just a whole new kind of portal, as you say, into a world that not all of us get to peer into.
And our kudos to FanDuel. I think it's not easy probably to push this message out there, but they are monthly on the FanDuel Fast channel, also on the YouTube channel that belongs to FanDuel. It is called The Comeback with Craig Carton. You can also see him on Breakfast Ball on FS1. Craig, it has been awesome talking with you.
Thank
We would
you.
love to have you back, brother.
I appreciate the opportunity. Good luck. Is this really the maiden voyage of
It
this?
sure is. You're our first guest for our new YouTube Sanity.
You should have made me the second guest.
Really appreciate it, Craig. Thank you so much, my friend.
My pleasure. Thank you for giving us the platform to talk about this because it is important.
Thanks, Craig. You're great.
Wow, that was
Life-changing.
extraordinary.
And so will you do that?
Will I talk to my son? My wife and I agreed yesterday when we heard him, and Craig just hit on it. When you hear your son screaming about a game that he has no real connection to, it hit me. I went up, I said, this is a little bit emotional. I said to my wife, look, we got to do something. This is a real problem. And she said, I know, but I need you. What Craig just said, I need you to start.
You have to model it, yeah.
I need him, but all of us parents allow it, Allison. We allow them to use our accounts. We give them a code, in most cases daily.
But why do you do that?
I don't have any idea. We've lost our freaking minds. I will say this. My son, we put money in the beginning. He did. It was his birthday or Christmas or money from grandparents. It wasn't our money. We have never refurbished that money. He is unfortunately very good at it. He's never lost that money.
I do worry that it's what Craig was saying, that he might be getting money elsewhere.
He might be. I don't believe so because he does ask my wife for so many codes. He's very transparent about it. He He admits he's gambling on most of these March Madness games. $3 billion will be gambled on March Madness. This is the biggest time. People talking about the Super Bowl. This is it. This is the Super Bowl of gambling because it's over the course of several weeks. There are 12, 16, 18 games a day.
Wow.
There are promotions coming at you fast and furious. March Madness, we are in the midst of the busiest gambling time in the United States, not even close to what we experience in the NFL because of this fever.
Yeah. I don't think that you have to chastise him, and I don't think that you have to punish him or anything. I think you just have to start the conversation. I mean, Craig has convinced me that you have to just start the conversation and have more transparency about it. And I think that those questions are great. Have you ever borrowed money from anybody?
Yeah.
Do you have a bookie? Are you doing this with kids at school? Have you borrowed any money from anybody at school? That kind of stuff, just so that you can get a real lay of the land of how the breadth of it, I guess.
I'll be curious. He used the word epidemic in the beginning. I don't think that's too strong at all. I think 10 years, when these kids grow up and they do make money and they do have real money, gambling is a part of their life now. They are going to grow into compulsive gamblers everywhere. And I don't know how this ends. Already, we've seen bankruptcies rise 28% in states that legalized gambling.
Oh my God.
28%
I mean,
bankruptcy.
what does that tell you? Doesn't that tell you we shouldn't legalize gambling?
100%, but you can't put the genie back in the bottle. What do we do? And I don't have a clue how we're going to address this epidemic, because that's truly what it is. And people are gambling on, it's not just basketball and football, it's European table tennis, Allison. Fourth most popular gambling sport in several US states,
brother.
table tennis.
I have an allergy to losing money. I just don't like, all I need to do is go to Atlantic City and lose for half an hour and then I am done. I don't have it, like my.
But you don't have that gene.
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
And neither do I, quite frankly. Aside from that one Super Bowl experience most recently, I've never found I'm going to close my accounts at the end of the year, and it won't drive me crazy at all. That'll be very easy for
Why
me
don't
to
you
do.
close it now?
Oh, I was going to make it through March Madness, but it's see, maybe I do have a problem.
A little bit.
Craig's story was unbelievable.
I know.
$30,000 a hand.
And to be rich. So what's interesting is, like, as we know, all addicts risk their lives. At some point, the addiction takes over your judgment, and you can risk your life and drink too much and do drugs and be associating with all sorts of unsavory characters. And so that story of him at night flying over the Atlantic Ocean in a helicopter to get his
Beating up on a pilot.
to get hit because he was jonesing for gambling. That tells you all you need to know.
I at least wish kids had, like, if they had to go to a casino, that would be fine. The fact that it's so readily available is what makes it so much easier and so much more addicting.
Well, we'll look forward to the next update
We will.
after your dinner conversation with your son.
I'm ready.
All right. Okay, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us on Sanity. Much more.